Main event of the evening.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we are discussing the 6th Garry Marshall directorial feature, Pretty Woman.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Pretty Woman.
At a fancy rich people party in Beverly Hills, Edward Lewis, visiting from New York, is inside on the phone with his girlfriend. She accuses him of treating her like she's always at his beck and call, and says she talks to his secretary more than him. They quickly break up.
Maybe I should just move out.
If that's what you want, yes.
All right, when you get back to New York, we'll discuss.
Now is as good a time as any.
That's fine with me, Edward. Goodbye.
He runs into another ex-girlfriend, Susan, on the way out, and she admits Edward's secretary was one of her bridesmaids. Edward's limousine is blocked from getting out, so Edward borrows the car of his lawyer, Philip Stuckey, to drive back to his hotel.
I don't think you should drive. You're a little excited. Don't drive my car. Let me work something out here.
In Hollywood, Vivian Ward prepares for a night of sex work. On her way to the street where she works, Hollywood Boulevard, she overhears a detective asking another man about a dead woman found in a dumpster. She meets her friend Kit in the Blue Banana Grill, and confronts her over using their rent money to buy drugs.
I can't believe you bought drugs with our rent. What is going on with you, kid?
I needed a little pick-me-up.
Oh, well, we need rent money.
Meanwhile, Edward has gotten lost with no idea how to get back to Beverly Hills. As Vivian and Kit work, Kit considers getting a pimp. Maybe her good-for-nothing boyfriend Carlos could do it, but Vivian is opposed to it. He would run their lives and take their money. Vivian spots Edward's car, stalled because he has trouble driving it, and at Kit's urging, asks Edward if he's interested in a date. He only wants directions, which she charges for.
You can't charge me for directions.
I can do anything I want to, baby. I ain't lost.
She joins him for the ride. They make conversation during the drive to the Regent Beverly Wilshire, where Edward is staying. Vivian knows more about cars than Edward, whose first auto was a limousine, so he lets her drive instead. They reach the hotel, and Vivian prepares to wait for the bus. Edward invites her up to his penthouse. In the elevator, Vivian scandalizes an older couple.
Close your mouth, dear.
In the room, Edward admits he's afraid of heights, and only got the penthouse because it's the best. Edward is hesitant to have sex, and they talk. Vivian guesses Edward is a lawyer, but is incorrect. Room service brings champagne and strawberries, and when Vivian expresses an interest in getting it over with, Edward offers to pay her to stay the entire night. When he thinks Vivian is doing drugs in the bathroom, he wants her to leave, only for it to turn out that she was just flossing. He admits that people rarely surprise him.
Yeah, well, you're lucky. Most of them shock the hell out of me.
Edward talks business on the phone while Vivian watches I Love Lucy on TV. After he hangs up, she performs oral sex on him, saying that she does everything except kissing on the mouth. The next morning, Edward and Stuckey set up a meeting with Jim Morse, whose business they're planning to buy. Edward and Vivian eat breakfast together, and Vivian observes that Edward doesn't sleep, do drugs, drink, or eat. What does he do?
Don't drink, don't smoke. What do you do? Don't drink, don't smoke. What do you do?
Edward explains that he buys companies, one's in financial difficulty, then breaks them up into pieces and sells them off. Vivian compares it to stealing cars and selling off the parts, but legal. She also ties his tie for him, while Vivian takes a bath and sings along to Prince on her Walkman. Edward talks to Stuckey on the phone again. Stuckey thinks Edward should bring a date to the meeting with Morse just to be safe. Edward tells Vivian he wants to hire her as an employee. They haggle for a price for 6 days, and settle on $3,000.
$2,000.
3,000.
Done.
Plus money for Vivian to buy something suitable for the dinner. Vivian calls Kit to catch her up about what happened, and tell her she's leaving money for Kit at the front desk. Kit advises her to go shopping at Rodeo Drive. Vivian stops in a boutique, and is chased off by 2 mean saleswomen.
You're obviously in the wrong place. Please leave.
She returns to the hotel, and is intercepted by the hotel manager, Barnard Thompson. He brings her to his office, and admits that Edward should have signed in any additional guests, but since he's a friend of the hotel, they'll overlook it. He pretends that Vivian is a relative, and she plays along, pretending to be Edward's niece.
Then you must be his...
Niece?
Of course.
When he advises her to dress more appropriately, Vivian admits that that's what she was trying to do, but nobody would let her shop. So, Barnard calls up a friend of his, Bridget, who works in a women's clothing store, to help Vivian out. Edward and his employees are discussing the Morse contract, only to be interrupted by news that Morse is getting a $350 million contract to build destroyers for the Navy. Edward instructs them to talk to one of their political contacts, Senator Adams, who is on the Appropriation Committee.
The Navy's not going to spend $350 million on anything without going to appropriations first.
Meanwhile, Vivian has chosen a cocktail dress with Bridget's help. Barnard then tutors her in fancy restaurant etiquette and which fork is which. Edward and Vivian go to dinner at the Voltaire, with Jim Morse and his grandson David. Vivian's lack of familiarity with the silverware helps break the ice with Jim, who doesn't want to see the company he built over 40 years destroyed.
I'm sure you understand I'm not thrilled at the idea of your turning 40 years of my work into your garage sale.
Morse also brings up Edward's father, who recently died. Morse wants to buy back Edward's 10 million shares in his company, but doesn't have the money, especially since Edward got their upcoming contract buried in the Appropriations Committee. Both grandfather and grandson storm out. At the penthouse, Vivian observes that Edward liked Morse, But Edward insists he won't let himself get emotionally involved in business, which Vivian can relate to. As Edward observes, they both screw people for money. When Vivian asks, Edward says his father died last month, after almost 15 years of them not speaking to one another. Vivian suggests they watch old movies all night. At 3 in the morning, Edward is gone, and Vivian finds him playing the piano in the hotel dining room. They have sex on the piano, without kissing on the mouth. The next day, Edward accompanies Vivian on a longer shopping excursion, reasoning that his presence will basically force salespeople to be respectful towards Vivian. Edward has to leave for work-related reasons, but Vivian has no issues on her own. She gets one salesman to give her his tie, and even stops by the first store she ever visited to rub it in the mean saleswomen's faces.
You work on commission, right?
Yes. Big mistake.
Edward learns which bank is underwriting Morse's loan to try and buy back his shares, and Stuckey urges him to call that bank. Edward, depressed, doesn't. Their company doesn't build or make anything. And Stuckey saying that they make money doesn't help. When Edward gets back to the penthouse, Vivian greets him wearing nothing but the tie. In the bathtub together, Edward recounts how his wealthy father left his mother for another woman, leaving her to raise Edward alone.
It cost me $10,000 in therapy to say that sentence. I was very angry with him.
His father was the president of the third company Edward ever dismantled. The next day, Edward and Vivian go to a polo match for business mingling. Stuckey sees Vivian talking to David Morse and tells Edward he thinks that Vivian is an industrial spy for the Morses. Edward admits to him that Vivian is a sex worker he met on Hollywood Boulevard. Stuckey then talks to Vivian, saying her secret is safe with him, and offering to get together with her before his wife calls him away.
We'll just have to do that,
Back at the penthouse, Vivian chews out Edward for telling Stuckey about her job. They argue, and Vivian decides to just take the money and leave. Edward goes after her and apologizes, admitting that he wasn't prepared to answer questions about them, and that he wants her to stay. Vivian tells Edward not to hurt her again. In bed, Vivian recounts how she came to LA, spent a long period of time broken alone, until she met Kit, who got her into sex work. During her first night working, she cried the entire time, and she admits that it's easy to internalize all the bad things people say about you. The next night, Edward and Vivian fly to San Francisco to go to the opera, Vivian wearing a beautiful necklace that Edward borrowed from a jeweler. The opera, La Traviata, moves Vivian to tears.
Did you enjoy the opera, dear?
Oh, it was so good I almost peed my pants.
Back at the hotel, they play chess, and Vivian suggests that Edward take the day off work tomorrow. He takes the suggestion to heart, and they spend the day at the park. That night, they kiss on the mouth, and after having sex, Vivian tells Edward she loves him. The next morning, their last day together, Edward offers to set up Vivian with an apartment and car and money. Vivian recounts how, as a child, her mother would lock her in the attic as a punishment, so she would pretend to be a princess trapped and rescued by a knight. But it never involved the knight putting her up in a condo. Kit visits Vivian at the hotel, and realizes that Vivian has fallen in love with Edward. Vivian admits that she likes him, but she doesn't know of anyone who this sort of thing has worked out for. Kit's only answer is Cinderella.
Cinderella.
At work, Edward decides not to buy Morse's company, instead offering to help him because he's still in a vulnerable position. Afterwards, Stuckey stops by Edward and Vivian's hotel room. Edward isn't there, Vivian is. Stuckey is depressed and angry and drunk over Edward deciding not to go through with the Morse deal, and tries to assault Vivian.
Maybe if I screw you, and take you to the opera, then I could be a happy guy, just like that.
Hey, get off me!
Edward gets there just in time and throws Stuckey out. Vivian still thinks the relationship wouldn't work out, and admits she still wants the fairy tale. Edward asks her to stay, not because he's paying her, but because she wants to. Vivian can't. Vivian prepares to go to San Francisco, saying goodbye to Kit. She leaves money for her, assuring her that she has potential.
Part of the Edward Lewis Scholarship Fund. We think you got a lot of potential, Kit Luca. You do?
At the hotel, Edward gives Barnard the necklace to return, and Barnard notes it must be difficult to let go of something so beautiful. As Vivian is about to leave her apartment, Edward arrives to the strain of opera music, and carrying flowers. He climbs up the fire escape, and the two kiss. Edward asks what happens after the knight climbs up the tower and rescues the princess. And Vivian says,
She rescues him right back.
Welcome to Hollywood. What's your dream? Everybody comes here.
Thank you, Peter. That was Pretty Woman. It was released on Friday, March 23rd, 1990. It was an immediate hit, topping the box office chart and eventually earning $463 million on a modest $14 million budget. The other big new movies in theaters at that time were
The Hunt for Red October, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Joe versus the Volcano, House Party, Nuns on the Run, and Lord of the Flies.
Peter, if you had been around in the very busy summer of 1990, what would you have wanted to see?
I would have loved to see Hunt for Red October in theaters. That is such a pretty movie. It makes submarines look so cool. I say that as someone who is generally submarine agnostic.
The only one I didn't see in theaters at the time was Lord of the Flies, but I certainly saw that many times in school.
I'm still putting off watching that version of Lord of the Flies because I'm very fond of the book and I'm very fond of the 1960s film adaptation.
It's a brilliant, exciting motion picture. Lord of the Flies.
Pretty Woman was directed by Garry Marshall. This was Garry's second film for Disney, which was desperate to keep him after the success of Beaches. Pretty Woman was written by J.F. Lawton, a screenwriter and producer from Riverside, California. He was paid only $2,500 for his script, which was originally called $3,000, so he was literally paid less than Vivian, the character. Although the ending of the film was famously changed, Lawton maintains that the movie we know is basically the story he wrote. Although Pretty Woman is often held up as an example of how Hollywood changes scripts to make them more commercial, Lawton doesn't necessarily agree with that assessment. He specifically wrote this script to be saleable because he wanted work. Before Pretty Woman, Lawton had written and directed Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death, also known as Piranha Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death.
The avocado jungle of death is where piranha women hide.
Starring Shannon Tweed and Lawton's longtime friend Bill Maher. After Pretty Woman, he wrote such films as Under Siege, DOA, Dead or Alive, and Blank Man. He also created the TV series VIP starring Pamela Anderson.
Oh, good for you!
As for the music in this movie, the movie's soundtrack album was also a substantial hit, reaching the Billboard Top 5, going triple platinum, and scoring a #1 hit single. Beaches had done all of that as well. Over the opening credits, we hear King of Wishful Thinking by the British pop duo Go West. It was a top 10 hit in both the US and Canada and is still considered a quintessential 90s song.
This is the entire 1990s?
Yes. Any thoughts on King of Wishful Thinking?
It's a pretty good song. I'm a bit more familiar with the live cover that Carly Rae Jepsen did, although she changed it to Queen of Wishful Thinking, but I think that works less because the title has a certain poetry to it with the repetition of King of Wishful Thinking, and if it's Queen of Wishful Thinking, that doesn't hit quite as hard.
After that, we hear Real Wild Child, Wild One. This song has a convoluted history. It goes back to 1958 when it was recorded under the title Wild One by Johnny O'Keefe. But the version people probably know best was by Iggy Pop in 1986. He changed the title to Real Wild Child, Wild One. The version that we hear in Pretty Woman is a sound-alike version by Chris Ocasek, son of Rick Ocasek of the Cars. How familiar were you with Real Wild Child, Wild One?
I'd heard the Iggy Pop cover a few times. I did not know about this whole elaborate saga behind it.
At the Blue Banana Club, which is fictional, by the way, we hear Show Me Your Soul by the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Fame 90 by David Bowie. Were you familiar with Fame 90 specifically?
I was not, no. When I was reading your notes for this, at first I misread it as Freedom 90, and I thought, wait, isn't that a George Michael song?
Julia Roberts famously performs the song Kiss by Prince while she's in the bathtub.
I don't have to undress me. Yeah, baby.
That song was a #1 hit for Prince in 1986, and this scene in Pretty Woman was pivotal in making Julia Roberts a star. What did you think of the bathtub scene with Kiss?
It is adorable. Kiss is a great song, and it would be a perfect song if not for the kissy noises that he makes. That is just audio hell for me. No, I do not want to hear that in a song.
During the Rodeo Drive montage, we hear Wild Women Do by Natalie Cole. It became a hit in numerous countries, including the United States, due to this film. Did you like that one, Wild Women Do?
That's a very fun song, and it's nice that they wrote it from the perspective of Vivian. It's got the mention of gotta pay her by the hour.
At the dinner meeting, we hear 2 violin concerti from Vivaldi's 4 Seasons, namely Autumn and Spring. Italian composer Antonio Vivaldi composed these in 1723, and I thought they fit the scene very nicely. Any thoughts on Vivaldi's 4 Seasons?
The violin concertos fit very well with the scene. They help establish that this is different from all the scenes where there's pop music.
This movie uses different kinds of music to convey to the audience that we're in different social strata. Edward's piano solo was written and performed by Richard Gere himself.
That's amazing. He's a multi-talented guy.
During the famous shopping montage, we hear Oh Pretty Woman, a #1 hit from 1964 for singer-songwriter Roy Orbison. The song was also a sizable hit for Van Halen in 1982. When Vivian greets Edward wearing just a necktie and high heels, we hear Songbird, a jazz instrumental by saxophonist Kenny G. It's from his 1986 album Duotones and was a top 10 hit, an incredible rarity for a jazz instrumental in the 1980s. Were you familiar with Songbird by Kenny G?
My experience with Kenny G is very, very limited.
It didn't take long for Kenny G to become a punchline, so this movie got in just under the wire with Songbird. When Vivian leaves the hotel wearing her iconic red dress, we hear Fallen by singer-songwriter Lauren Wood. It's from her 1981 album Cat Trick.
That one also did not make much of an impression on me. I think because right after that we get the La Traviata scene, and that kind of drowns it out musically, I feel like.
The selections that we hear from Verdi's La Traviata were actually arranged and recorded specifically for this movie, and this movie is credited with bringing that opera back into public consciousness. When Vivian leaves the hotel alone in the limo near the end of the movie, we hear It Must Have Been Love by the Swedish pop duo Roxette. When they were asked to contribute music to Pretty Woman, Roxette said they didn't have time to write and record an all-new song. Instead, they repurposed a previously released Christmas song with the Christmas references removed.
So they did the reverse of that one thing from Love Actually, where Bill Nighy is re-recording an old song to be about Christmas.
By riding the coattails of this movie, It Must Have Been Love topped the American charts and became Roxette's best-known song, which must have been a weird experience for them. Oh, like this thing that we didn't even care enough to write a new song for it. Now it's our biggest song.
Yeah.
As for our main cast members, we can start with Richard Gere as Edward Lewis.
Richard Gere?
Oh, the world's most famous Buddhist.
What about the Dalai Lama?
Oh.
Richard is an actor from Philadelphia who started appearing in films and TV shows in the 1970s. In the early days of his career, he booked some guest appearances on TV shows like Kojak, but it was the 1977 movie Looking for Mr. Goodbar that made him a legitimate movie star. He followed that up with movies like
Days of Heaven, An Officer and a Gentleman, and American Gigolo.
He very nearly passed on Pretty Woman, thinking that Edward was just a generic guy in a suit, but the movie made him more popular than ever. Peter, what did you think of Richard Gere as Edward Lewis?
I think he's right that Edward Lewis easily could have come across as a generic guy in a suit. And I think it's to Gere's credit as an actor that he is able to make him come across as an actual person. Edward's thing is that he starts out as this guy who is entirely defined by his kind of evil job, and he gradually comes to the realization that maybe he's the bad guy, and he doesn't want to be the bad guy anymore. There is a very clear parallel between him and Vivian. They both realize that they are more than just their jobs, and they don't have to be defined by them. Gere is also really, really good at one of the most important things in any romantic comedy, which is the ability to look at someone like you are madly in love with them. And I think my favorite example of that is when they are at the opera and Vivian is crying because of how beautiful it is, and he's just looking at her. Love that.
I thought Richard Gere was pretty remarkable in this movie. The best parts of his acting are nonverbal, really. A lot of the performance is in his eyes. So I was always watching Richard Gere's eyes during his scenes because of the way he looks at Julia Roberts. Of course, we have to talk about Julia Roberts as Vivian Ward.
Look, I'd love to be your beck and call girl, but you're a rich, good-looking guy. You could get a million girls free.
Julia is an Oscar-winning actress from Smyrna, Georgia, who's been appearing in films and television shows since the late 1980s. This was not her first film. She'd already appeared in Mystic Pizza, Steel Magnolias, and Satisfaction, and had been getting good reviews, but it was Pretty Woman that made her an international superstar. In terms of box office grosses, Julia is the most popular actress of all time. Her best-known films include
Notting Hill, Conspiracy Theory, The Pelican Brief, Erin Brockovich, for which she won that Oscar,
My Best Friend's Wedding, Ocean's 11, Eat, Pray, Love, and many, many more.
Peter, what did you think of Julia Roberts as Vivian Ward?
I think that it is very, very difficult not to watch this movie without coming away from it at least a little bit in love with Julia Roberts. She is just ridiculously charming and effervescent in this movie. Maybe it is a little bit unrealistic. This does kind of play into the trope of the sex worker with a heart of gold who surprisingly shows up and helps the other protagonist reevaluate his life. That is true, but you do see that she does genuinely like being around him. She and Richard Gere have ridiculously good chemistry. Throughout the film, we also see that she is also just a very self-possessed person. Like, we see that she puts a lot of importance on her independence and her ability to take care of herself. We see that she is very happy to spend Edward's money, but she also doesn't want him to think that she's a possession of his, and she doesn't want him to put her in positions where, like, she isn't able to defend herself, like with Stuckey. And I think a very good example of that is when they have their argument after he's told Stuckey that she's a sex worker. It takes him a while to get there, but he does eventually apologize, and I think that is also part of the fantasy, just this idea that he is emotionally intelligent enough to eventually get to the point where he is able to accept that what he's done is wrong. And I really like her delivery of, "You hurt me. Don't do it again."
When I revisited this movie for this podcast, I was reminded exactly why Pretty Woman made Julia Roberts such a huge star. She has to be funny. She has to be dramatic. She also has to be romantic. Almost every A-list actress in Hollywood was considered for the role, but I am so glad that they went with Julia. Her chemistry with Richard Gere is immediate right from when they get into the car and start talking about the Lotus Esprit and how to drive it properly. I can't imagine this movie without her.
I think it actually fits really well that she wasn't an A-lister at the time. She was up and coming. That kind of adds to the Cinderella resonance of this.
While talking about Julia Roberts, we should also mention Shelley Garry Marshall, Julia Roberts' body double.
Body double. You can't believe everything you see. Rated R.
Shelley is a professional body double from Hollywood whose other movies include
Rising Sun, Double Impact, My Stepmother is an Alien, and Showgirls 2, Pennies from Heaven.
Our next cast member is Laura San Giacomo as Kit DeLuca.
Oh, God, the pressure of a name.
Laura is an actress from West Orange, New Jersey, who at the time of this movie had just had her breakthrough role in the film Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I'm pretty sure that's what got her this movie. After Pretty Woman, she became widely known for her television work on such shows as Just Shoot Me, Saving Grace, and NCIS, plus the miniseries based on Stephen King's The Stand. You might have also seen Laura on
Grey's Anatomy, The Mentalist, Barry, Veronica Mars, Medium, and many more.
Peter, what did you think of Laura San Giacomo as Kit DeLuca?
In contrast to Vivian, Kit feels like a slightly less Hollywood portrayal of sex work, so to speak. Unlike Vivian, she is someone who does use drugs, and she has been doing this for longer than Vivian. If Vivian is a pretty rose-colored glasses view of what someone who has done sex work at this time when that was even more stigmatized than it is now, and you were vulnerable to harassment from Johns and the police, Kit is maybe a bit more realistic of a portrayal of someone who is living that. Unlike Vivian, the movie makes a point of saying like, oh, Vivian doesn't use drugs. Kit does, and sometimes it causes her to spend money that was supposed to go to rent. She has a terrible boyfriend who is almost definitely taking advantage of her. That being said, I do really like her interplay with Vivian. You do get the sense that they kind of balance each other out. Kit is more experienced than Vivian, but at the same time, Vivian is kind of the one who has to be the more responsible one when it comes to things like rent money. And Roberts and Sam Giacomo do have really good, believable friend chemistry. Even when they're just talking on the phone together, I believe them as friends. And I did think it was very fun that Kit does the same thing that Vivian did when she first gets to the hotel of scandalizing the first old couple she sees by flirting with the old guy.
$50, Grandpa. For 75, the wife can watch.
That was fun. I also liked that Kit also basically does get to do the same thing that Vivian did, which is explore other job opportunities. They make a point of, at the end, showing that Kit is going to go to beauty school. She's going to get a new roommate. It doesn't end with just, Vivian leaves and she leaves some money for Kit. That was nice.
I thought that Laura San Giacomo added quite a lot to this movie. A character like Kit DeLuca, this drug-using prostitute in Hollywood, could be a depressing character, but Laura doesn't play her that way at all. I was glad that Julia Roberts has somebody to play off of who is not Richard Gere, so she can step outside of the Richard Gere scenes and talk to somebody else whenever she needs to. Laura just brings such a charming quality to this character. You would believe that Vivian and Kit would be friends because Kit just seems fun to hang out with. So I'm hoping that Kit uses the money wisely at the end of the movie and does pursue her dreams.
Cos doesn't show up at all in the end, so I assume that he's left entirely.
Or, something else has happened to him. You never know. We also have Ralph Bellamy as James Morse.
I don't know about you, but I've never been able to figure which goes with what.
This was the final film in a nearly 60-year career for screen legend Ralph Bellamy. His best-known movies include His Girl Friday, The Wolf Man, he's great in that, Oh God, Sunrise at Campobello, and many more. Ralph was born in Chicago in 1904. He started in films in 1931 and worked steadily in that medium through the 30s and 40s, often as a second male lead. In the 1950s, he moved to television and appeared in dozens of shows throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, while also making occasional film appearances. In the 1980s, thanks to his performance as Randolph Duke in John Landis's Trading Places, he made quite a comeback and was busy with film and TV roles throughout the 1980s. He died in 1991 at the age of 87. Peter, any thoughts on Ralph Bellamy as James Morse?
James Morse has to be likable. It has to be believable that Edward would meet this guy and like him enough to eventually realize what I am doing is wrong. I'm going to turn my life around and help him instead of destroying his life's work. And that is absolutely what Ralph Bellamy provides. The moment when it all clicks into place is when he sees Vivian struggling with the forks, and he admits that he himself also does not know which fork goes with which, and then he makes a point of eating the food with his fingers to make her feel more comfortable. That was great.
I think Ralph is wonderful in this part, and I was so glad that he got this nice little role right before he died. Ralph had a tremendous screen career that lasted for decades, but he didn't really hit his stride until he was a much older man. Somehow age suited him really well, and he suddenly became very in demand in the 1980s for playing parts like this. We also have Jason Alexander as Philip Stuckey.
Walk away? Hey, forget it, pal. We got 1,000 man-hours in on this. Nobody's walking away from anything.
Jason, real name J. Scott Greenspan, is a very accomplished stage and on-screen actor from Newark, New Jersey, who's been working in film and television since the early 1980s. He's obviously best known for his role as George Costanza on Seinfeld.
Well, the jerk store called. They're running out of you.
When Pretty Woman was released in March 1990, however, only the Seinfeld pilot had aired. Jason was already familiar to the public, though, through his numerous TV commercials for companies like Western Union and McDonald's. He's also an acclaimed Broadway actor, and at the time of this movie had just won a Tony for Jerome Robbins' Broadway. Jason's other stage credits include Stephen Sondheim's Merrily We Roll Along and Neil Simon's Broadway Bound, plus the touring company of Mel Brooks's The Producers. Animation fans may also remember Jason as the voice of the title character on Duckman. Peter, what did you think of Jason Alexander as Philip Stuckey?
Stuckey is the closest thing the movie has to like an actual villain. I did kind of appreciate that he's not established as such from the get-go. He's introduced as this neurotic guy who worries about work so that Edward doesn't necessarily have to. Like, Edward can just focus on moving forward, whereas Philip takes care of the details. Over the course of the film, as we see Edward start to question whether or not he's doing the right thing, Stuckey is the one who's like, no, don't worry about it. Let's just keep going. And we see it by how he treats Vivian when he learns that she's a sex worker. Oh, this guy sucks. And then there's the assault scene, which I think the assault scene was entirely unnecessary. It doesn't really impact the rest of the movie. You could cut it and it wouldn't really change anything. I guess it was there because they wanted to emphasize the rescue motif, but you've already done that. You did not need to have this. It gave Jason Alexander more to do, but I don't think it was necessarily a great thing to do. That being said, Jason Alexander plays this role very well, and he is very good at switching from beleaguered everyman to kind of a monster in a way that feels disturbingly realistic.
In the early stages of Pretty Woman, it's very easy to see Philip Stuckey as basically a George Costanza type character. But over the course of the movie, you see that there's something much darker in Philip that emerges very much at the end of the film. And Jason is very good at bringing out both sides of Stuckey's personality, the nebbishy nerd, and then the more aggressive evil guy that we see toward the end of the film. We also have Hector Elizondo as Bernard Thompson.
Call maintenance and have them deal with this. You must delegate authority. Yes, sir.
After merely making cameos in Overboard and Beaches, Hector was back in the main cast for this one. Peter, what did you think of Hector Elizondo in Pretty Woman?
I love him. This definitely plays on his ability to be dignified, but also still likable. He is someone who straddles the two worlds of Edward and Vivian. Like, on the one hand, because he runs this hotel, he is in close contact with the wealthy and powerful constantly, but he's also a guy who works for a living. He has an actual job. And unlike Edward, he doesn't just dismantle companies. He runs this place.
We got to run this bitch.
And I think that's why he's able to sympathize with Vivian once he gets past the thing of like, well, try to dress more appropriately. I did also like that he helps her prepare for the dinner because she asks him to. He doesn't do it unprompted. I appreciated that because then it's like, okay, yes, he's helping her because she wants his help. It's not like he's helping her unasked for.
I think Hector Elizondo is a great asset to this film. He gives a very warm performance in this, and he has to be the one enforcing the rules, but also doing so with compassion. And nobody's better at playing characters like this than Hector. So I was so glad to have him back. Up next is Alex Hyde White as James Morse's grandson, David.
Mr. Lewis, my grandfather believes the men who create a company should control its destiny.
Alex is an actor from London who's been working in TV and film since the late 1970s when he guested on Battlestar Galactica. He's the son of actor Wilfred Hyde White, and I wonder if Alex's appearance in Pretty Woman is a subtle acknowledgement of My Fair Lady. In any event, Alex's other film and TV credits include
Dexter, Catch Me If You Can, Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, The Mentalist, and many, many more.
He even appeared on The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo opposite Happy Days, and he's still working today. Peter, did Alex Hyde White as David make any impression on you at all?
I wonder if you're right about his casting being a reference to My Fair Lady, because that was something that I thought of when I got to the polo scene, because My Fair Lady very famously prominently features a horse race scene. There's kind of this running gag throughout the film of Vivian deliberately scandalizing the people around her. Like when she says to the two women at the polo match,
Well, I'm not trying to land him, I'm just using him for sex.
Back to Hyde White himself. Yeah, he's good. He is kind of like a plot point in that he serves to inflame Stuckey's paranoia about Vivian, but he does do a good job of like coming across as charming. And I think the fact that he and his grandfather seem very close, that does kind of serve as a good foil to Edward, who is estranged from his family because his family kind of sucks. And it's like, well, the Morses actually like each other. You don't have to be evil, Edward.
Alex Hyde White is not necessarily given a fun or interesting character to play, but I think Alex still plays it very well. He's still quite likable and engaging, and I liked his scenes.
And it's nice that like he was the first one to storm out of the dinner scene because he was so mad at how Edward was being to his grandfather. Good for him.
Among the supporting players in this movie are sitcom legend Eleanor Donahue, who also guested on Happy Days as Bridget, the saleswoman at the clothing store.
He's not really my uncle. They never are, dear.
Amy Yazbek as Philip's wife, Elizabeth.
He's leaving. Edward's leaving.
Hank Azaria as the homicide detective.
I got tourists photographing the body out.
Comedian Larry Miller as Mr. Hollister, the obsequious clothing store manager.
Exactly how obscene an amount of money were you talking about? Just profane or really offensive?
And Day Young from Rock and Roll High School as one of the snobby saleswomen.
I don't think this would fit you.
And we should not overlook Patrick Richwood, a returnee from Beaches, as Dennis, the elevator operator.
She's with Mr. Lewis.
Mr. Lewis?
That's it.
Of those supporting players I mentioned, were there any who really stood out to you?
I was so happy to see Dae Young when I recognized her, especially because it was such a different role from what I knew her from. It was also very fun seeing Hank Azaria there. As mentioned before, this is a very Hollywood fairy tale take on sex work, and it's not really interested in engaging with what life is like for someone who works the street. But in that moment, it does make it clear that, yes, this is genuinely dangerous.
Of these supporting players, my favorite by far was Larry Miller as the clothing store manager, where he is the one flattering Richard Gere and Julia Roberts.
It really does illustrate what Edward said about how these people don't respect people, they respect credit cards. He's just being a total kiss ass from beginning to end, and it takes him a while to realize that he's supposed to be kissing the ass of Vivian and not Edward.
Along the way in Pretty Woman, you can look for cameos by
Linda Goodfriend as the tourist who takes pictures of a murder scene, Garry Marshall's kids, Scott and Kathleen, Gary's niece, Tracy Reiner, and Jerry Paris's daughter, Julie. Naturally, Garry Marshall himself makes a cameo as well.
That was a blast.
And I want to give a shout out to Marilyn Vance, who designed the costumes for this film. Marilyn's other credits include
Die Hard, Roadhouse, Uncle Buck, The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller, The Untouchables, Predator, and Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
This is one of those movies where I think costumes really help define the characters, and Marilyn Vance was a big part of making that happen. As for the cultural and historical references in this movie, the magician at the beginning of the movie makes a joking reference to the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s and 90s.
So let's imagine, ladies, that you're a savings and loan officer. Watch. 1, 2, 3. See? You've got it all, and we've got nothing.
This was when approximately a third of all savings and loan organizations, or S&Ls, failed between 1986 and 1995 due to an extended deflation of a real estate lending bubble. Deregulation and risky lending may have contributed to the problem. I cannot begin to explain any of this, but it ultimately cost American taxpayers $123 billion. Edward asks one of his subordinates about how the Morse stock opened on the Nikkei.
How did the Morse stock open at the Nikkei?
The Nikkei is an index of the Tokyo Stock Exchange published by the world's largest financial newspaper, the Nikkei. Edward says he needs to go to New York because he has tickets to the Met. He means the Metropolitan Opera House in New York. It opened in 1966 and is located on Broadway in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. That's a way of foreshadowing Edward's deep love for opera, which of course we'll get to later in the movie. The car that is so pivotal to the plot of this movie is a 1989 Lotus Esprit SE.
Wait a minute. It's a Lotus Esprit.
This is a high-end, limited edition British sports car. The Esprit was manufactured from 1976 to 2004. Only 10,000 were ever made. This production used a Lotus Esprit because Lamborghini and Porsche both said no to being in a movie about prostitution. Jason Alexander and Amy Yazbek managed to break one of the car's windows during the polo scene. After that, I don't think you see the car anymore. Were you impressed with the Lotus Esprit?
I am not a car person, but yes, I was impressed with it. It looks really cool. It looks like something out of a comic book or something, but in a good way, not a bad way, like the Cybertruck.
And it's not my imagination, Peter. The opening credits to this movie are written in the same font that the Gap was using at that time. So the opening credits of this movie kind of look like the Gap logo.
Fall into the gap now, get to the gap.
We see lots of Hollywood landmarks on display in this movie.
The Hollywood sign, the Taft Building, the Pantages Theater, Tower Records, and Grauman's Chinese Theater.
You can also look for a huge Nike billboard featuring Bo Jackson, who was a professional football player and a professional baseball player at the same time. Did this movie make you want to visit Hollywood?
Not really, no. Parts of it look very nice, but also, someone did get murdered there.
Yeah, that tends to make it less appealing. We see Carole Lombard's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That's at 6930 Hollywood Boulevard, right across from Grauman's Chinese. A homeless man played by Garry Marshall jokingly tells Edward that he's found Sylvester Stallone's house in Beverly Hills.
That's Sylvester Stallone's house right there.
In fact, Stallone did have a home in a gated community called Beverly Park. He sold it for $58 million in 2022. He also had homes in Hidden Hills, La Quinta, and Malibu. These days, however, Sylvester Stallone lives in Florida. And I don't believe he even has any residences in California. Kit claims that she and Vivian worked the territory from Bob Hope's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame to Ella Fitzgerald's star. She also mentions the Ritz brothers and Fred Astaire.
Bob Hope and the Ritz brothers are at 6758 Hollywood Boulevard. Fred Astaire is next door at 6756.
Ella Fitzgerald is just down the road at 6738.
All in all, then, Kit and Vivian are laying claim to about a block of Hollywood Boulevard. Kit then directs the other prostitute to Monty Hall and Esther Williams.
Go rest up by Monty Hall, Esther Wilson. Esther Williams, where you belong.
Monty Hall's star is at 6801 Hollywood Boulevard, but you'll find Esther at 1560 Vine Street. That's nearly a mile away. I checked out that neighborhood, by the way. It didn't look like a hive of prostitution and drugs and murder. It just looked like a normal street.
It's been 30 years. It's probably been gentrified by now.
Vivian asks if her wig makes her look like Carol Channing.
Do you think I look like Carol Channing?
For much of her career, musical comedy star Carol Channing sported a very distinctive hairdo, a chin-length platinum blonde bob with bangs that almost completely covered her forehead. Peter, did you think that she looked like Carol Channing?
I did not know. The main reason for that is that the main thing that I associate with Carol Channing are her very distinctive eyes, and Julia Roberts does not have those.
Edward asks Vivian for directions to the Regent Beverly Wilshire. That's at 9500 Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills, about 5 miles from where Vivian hangs out on Hollywood Boulevard. Edward will want to take
Highland Avenue South, turn right on Fountain Street, then hang a left onto La Cienega,
right on Santa Monica Boulevard, left on Beverly Drive, and then right on Wilshire.
It strikes me now that this movie would never have happened in a world where GPS existed.
As someone who gets lost regularly, if I do not have Google Maps on, I feel Edward's pain.
Vivian says she learned about cars from Road and Track.
You know about cars? Where'd that come from?
Road and Track?
That's a magazine for car enthusiasts that's been published since 1947. It comes out 6 times a year and still does. You ever read any Road and Track, Peter?
Nope. I know it's surprising given that I am a big car guy.
Vivian tells Edward that his car is a standard H.
You're not shifting right. This is a standard H.
Standard H. Like I know what that means.
That means the car has a manual transmission with 6 different gears arranged into a pattern that looks sort of like a capital H with a vertical line bisecting it in the middle. Vivian claims that your foot is as big as your forearm from the elbow to the wrist. I thought this was made up, Peter, but it is true. It's an example of how the human body is proportional.
This movie is educational.
Vivian charges $100 an hour for her services. That's about $250 in today's money. And it means that the $3,000 she charges for the week is a little over $7,500. Does that seem like a proper amount of money for what she's offering?
That does seem kind of low, all things considered. I mean, I guess she's not like a super high-end sex worker, but also people should be paid for the labor that they provide. And surely it should be more. I mean, I guess she's also getting to stay in his hotel room with him free of charge, and he's also paying for food and nice clothes, so...
When you factor all that in, it's more than $7,500. The Regent Beverly Wilshire is a very real luxury hotel in Beverly Hills, first opened in 1928 and still operating today. The hotel is quite aware of its connection to this movie and even offers a Pretty Woman for a Day package to its guests. You can expect to pay about $900 a night to stay there. Did you want to stay in the Regent Beverly Wilshire after seeing this movie?
A little bit. So if I ever do go to Hollywood, maybe I'll stop by there. I don't think I'll be able to afford a Pretty Woman for a Day, alas.
Edward laments, I miss keys.
I miss keys.
It's tough to pinpoint a specific year, but it looks like traditional hotel keys started being replaced by key cards in the 1970s, though the familiar magstripe cards didn't come along until the 1980s. Speaking of technology, there is one particular piece of technology that you can very much tell was a new thing when Pretty Woman came out. Cell phones.
Yes.
There are a lot of jokes about cell phones in the movie. My favorite was when the guy drives by in the convertible and he's on his cell phone and the little kid is on like a little kid's cell phone. And the joke is supposed to be, can you imagine a kid with a phone? At the time, this was 1990. It was a very different world. Vivian watches the classic episode, Lucy's Italian Movie, from the 5th season of I Love Lucy.
You know, I never saw this episode.
It originally aired on April 16th, 1956.
The plot has the Ricardos and Mertzes traveling to Rome, where Lucy is asked to audition for a movie called Bitter Grapes. To prepare for that movie, she makes a memorable visit to an old-fashioned vineyard where the grapes are still crushed by barefoot women.
While Garry had nothing to do with that famous episode, he did write for Lucille Ball on The Lucy Show in the 1960s. I think he was paying tribute to his old boss by including this scene.
Lucy's going to be forever. So every Lucy show you write is going to be like an insurance policy.
Edward explains that he is a corporate raider. That's an investor who buys a significant share in a vulnerable or undervalued company. The goal of the corporate raider is to increase the company's value and then sell it at a profit, usually after restructuring the company, cutting costs, and selling off assets. In 1991, Danny DeVito played a corporate raider in the movie Other People's Money. Both Pretty Woman and Other People's Money include a line about how a corporate raider doesn't actually make anything except money.
I don't make anything. I'm making you money.
One of the inspirations for this movie, according to J.F. Lawton, was he saw all these news stories about corporate raiders, and he saw them as destroying America. And he wanted to make a movie about a corporate raider. I think it's significant that Richard Gere stops being a corporate raider by the end of the movie, really. I think he's kind of giving up that life.
I really do like how he mentions them not building anything. Like, that's a really good callback to when I believe David Moore says that men like his grandfather built America.
Kit recommends that Viv do her shopping on Rodeo Drive.
Rodeo Drive, baby.
This is a 2-mile-long street in Beverly Hills, famous for luxurious, high-end shops. It's noted for palm trees and extravagant architecture. The street used to have normal, everyday businesses on it, but that started to change with the opening of a boutique called Giorgio Beverly Hills in 1961. By the end of the 1960s, other brands like Gucci, Van Cleef & Arpels, and Vidal Sassoon had open locations on Rodeo Drive. Did you ever want to visit Rodeo Drive?
Maybe. I mean, I guess it might be a fun place to window shop.
I actually have visited Rodeo Drive just as a tourist. I didn't buy anything, obviously. But while I was there, Peter, I got to meet an actual celebrity who happened to be shopping on Rodeo Drive.
Oh my gosh, who?
Cesar Romero.
Oh my gosh.
That man has been outwitted, and the fabulous jewel collection is ours.
Among the businesses that we see on Rodeo Drive in this movie, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Diamonds on Rodeo, and Gucci. As far as I can tell, they are all still there in 2025. Vivian watches the ending of the 1963 film Charade, starring Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant.
From Charade, starring Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn.
It's a romantic thriller directed by Stanley Donen in the style of Alfred Hitchcock. In the film, Audrey's character Reggie is a widow whose late husband stole some money. Reggie is soon pursued by dangerous men who want that money back. Along the way, she meets Cary Grant, an undercover agent for the U.S. Treasury Department who goes by numerous aliases. His character has about 4 different names in Charade, hence the title of the film.
Oh, I love you, Adam, Alex, Peter, Brian, whatever your name is.
Before Edward's fateful business meeting, we get a brief glimpse of some more Los Angeles landmarks, including Bank of America Plaza at 333 South Hope in the Bunker Hill neighborhood. We also see the large public sculpture right outside. That's 4 Arches by Alexander Calder, standing at 63 feet tall and made of steel. It was completed in 1974, just 2 years before Calder's death. Philip mentions that as a kid, he liked to play Monopoly. He mentions a couple of the most valuable pieces of property on the board, Boardwalk and Park Place.
So I liked Monopoly, huh? Boardwalk, Park Place. What's the point?
We've talked about this classic American board game many times, mainly because the Cunninghams were avid Monopoly players. Edward and Vivian attend a polo match. This was filmed at the Los Angeles Equestrian Center in Burbank, California. And yes, that location does play host to real polo matches on a regular basis. The characters are supposedly watching a match between teams called the Falcons and the Gems, which are, of course, the names of 2 street gangs from Happy Days. The announcer also uses the term chucker. Polo matches are divided into periods of play called chuckas or chuckers, lasting about 7.5 minutes apiece. Peter, did you pick up on the Falcons and Gems joke?
I did. That was great.
The announcer at the polo match says that the stomping of the divots is one of the oldest traditions of polo.
This is a time-honored tradition, ladies and gentlemen. As old as the game of polo itself. Kings and queens used to do this.
I thought this was also made up for the movie, but it seems to be true. Goofy as it might seem, this is the most efficient way of repairing the field and avoiding injuries to horses and riders. And it looks like the one time when the people at the polo match are actually having fun.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that polo match didn't look all that fun to me. So the stomping of the divots looked like the best part. Edward jokes that he found Vivian through 976 Babe.
Wherever did you find her?
976 Babe.
This joke might be lost on modern audiences, but 900 numbers or pay-per-call services were extremely popular in the 1980s and 90s. Today, some 900 numbers still exist, but most carriers do not recognize them. Peter, I assume you grew up in a world without 900 numbers.
When I was growing up, those were already sadly a thing of the past. Sadly, I say. Is it sad?
No, it's not. They were really exploitative and a horrible way to make money. Really, it's a blatant scam. You're really just robbing people and giving them nothing.
Like that one episode of The Simpsons where Lisa gets addicted to the Corey hotline.
Here are some words that rhyme with Corey. Glory, story, allegory, Montessori.
The opera sequence was actually shot at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles. When Edward and Vivian enter the building, there are actually giant dinosaur skeletons just out of frame. The opera they attend, Giuseppe Verdi's La Traviata from 1853, was actually an inspiration for the story in Pretty Woman. The opera tells the story of a courtesan or escort who falls in love with her wealthy patron, but ends their relationship to spare his family. Again, this movie brought new attention to La Traviata and really made people curious in checking out that opera, and I hope some of them did. According to Edward, Vivian liked La Traviata better than The Pirates of Penzance, the comic opera by Gilbert and Sullivan that premiered in 1872.
Vegetable, animal, and mineral. I am the very model of a modern major general.
I have not seen La Traviata performed live, but I have seen The Pirates of Penzance performed live, and I found it to be pretty delightful. Do you have any feelings about either of those two operas?
I have not seen La Traviata yet. Pirates of Penzance is a lot of fun. I really loved Edward's line about how with opera you either love it or hate it immediately, and if you love it, you'll always love it, but if you hate it at first, you might learn to appreciate it, but it won't be part of your soul. That was beautiful.
That whole sequence is one of the gems of the movie. Vivian treats Edward to a snap dog, though he doesn't know what a snap dog is.
You'll buy a snap dog, we'll cop a squat under a tree somewhere.
She might be referring to a specific brand of hot dog. There is one company with that name, or she could just mean any hot dog with a good snap to it. Usually that refers to a hot dog with a natural casing made of lamb or pig intestine. Peter, had you ever heard the term snap dog?
I had not, no. At first I assumed it was like a hot dog with like a set of specific toppings, but looking it up, it apparently is not that, so.
Maybe that's just a term that's specific to Julia Roberts. Vivian compares herself to Rapunzel. Later, Kit mentions Cinderella. Garry Marshall saw this whole movie as a fairy tale with Richard Gere as Prince Charming and Hector Elizondo as the fairy godmother. So he was the one working all of these fairy tale references into the film. Kit's new roommate says she wants to be in the Ice Capades. Well, she had better hurry. The traveling ice show known as the Ice Capades ended in 1995 with only sporadic revival since then. Aww. They're also mentioned in Young Doctors in Love. Hector Elizondo is the one I think who wants to go to the Ice Capades in that movie. During the final scene, you might notice that Kit and Vivian have a poster of the 80s hair metal band Rat on their wall.
Out on the streets, that's where we'll meet.
That was funny to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's just because Rat is a C-list heavy metal band, I feel like. Like, they're not really one of the ones that people really ride hard for.
In the original dark version of the script, Edward takes Vivian back to where he found her, and Vivian uses the money to take herself and Kit to Disneyland.
I'm going to Disneyland!
The new happy ending was devised by Garry Marshall and his producer, Laura Ziskin. It was Laura who penned the film's famous last line, "She rescues him right back." Did you know about the Disneyland ending?
I did, yeah. And all things considered, it's not as happy of an ending, but it is kind of a nice ending, and it would have cemented the idea of Vivian and Kit as an important relationship too. So even if it had stuck with that as the ending, I think I also would have been satisfied with that.
I think the ending that they came up with was better, especially that wonderful final shot where you pull back from the balcony and then the guy's talking about Hollywood and dreams is walking through the foreground, and he basically walks off the screen into the end credits. I thought that was all pretty brilliant. So, Peter, I hardly need to ask, but were there any outstanding fashions in Pretty Woman?
Yes. I really liked the boots that Vivian was wearing near the beginning. During her getting dressed montage, I like the detail that she has to color in some of the spots where they've been discolored. This is probably the only pair she has, and they're her work shoes, so like they are an expense, and she needs to take care of them. And you know, she's walking all day in them, so they probably get all worn and stuff. Of course, there is also the famous cocktail dress that she wears for the dinner. It's a little black dress.
Little black dress!
It's a bit lacy, it's off the shoulders, and she's got the little black necklace around it. And of course, there is also the iconic red dress that she wears to the opera, which also off the shoulders. It's got a ruffle from the waist down to keep it interesting and break up the monotony. It's also very beautiful. And I did also like the very, very 80s suit that she is wearing when she and Kit meet up again. Like, it's not quite 80s power businesswoman, but it's like on the spectrum of that. And I did laugh when Kit said that she's afraid to hug her because she didn't want to wrinkle her.
Did you have any other observations you wanted to make about Pretty Woman?
I don't know why I was surprised by this, but there is quite a bit of sex in this movie. Obviously, of course there is, because this is a movie about a sex worker. It's about adults who can consent to this and who do very happily consent to it. I think I was mostly just surprised by it because this has been said before, but we live in a very sexless time for movies. It is very surprising going back to this feel-good romantic comedy, and you've got scenes where they're in the bath together, where like she puts a pillow under her knees because she's going to go down on him. There's a scene where he goes down on her on a piano. Love that scene. There's a part where they have sex and you get a snippet of boob and her nipple. It's like, oh yeah, there was a time when you could just make movies for adults where they did adult things. Unlike now where everything has to be all four quadrants, so that's not going to happen anymore.
That definitely puts this movie as the product of another era. That is something that stood out to me as well. It was such a different world in 1990, but this was completely common at the time. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this movie any good?
My God, yes. This movie is great. It's just this unabashedly foamy, sweet, delicious fairy tale. It is just a treat from start to finish. It is everything that a romantic comedy needs to be, which is not realistic. It is just something to really enjoy.
This movie was such a pleasure to review for this podcast. When we prepare for these podcasts, we have to spend a lot of time with the movie. You basically have to hang out with the movie for a few hours. And Pretty Woman is so much fun to spend time with. The performances are all great. The movie is very attractive looking. I liked a lot of the music in it. The storyline moves along at a good pace. When this movie was new, we owned a VHS copy of Pretty Woman. My sister and I would watch this movie over and over again, and phrases from the movie started infiltrating our conversations. So Pretty Woman kind of affected the way we talked to each other for a while. Watching this movie, all these memories came flooding back. Lines like, color me happy, there's a sofa in here for two, and I'm high on life, can't you tell? And big mistake, big, huge. Those were just things that my sister and I would say to each other. All those memories came flooding back when I watched the movie, and it still works like gangbusters in 2025. This is a movie that young directors and screenwriters should definitely study, pick up on what makes this movie entertaining and what makes it involving, and try and bring some of that to whatever you're making. It really helps when all the elements of a movie come together. I've noticed that the films that I like from Garry are the ones that are generally upbeat and fun to spend time with. That's why the two films that I didn't really connect with were Nothing in Common and Beaches, because those stories are kind of a downer. And so those were a little bit of a chore to get through occasionally, but this was not a chore at all. This was just so fun. It has so many fun little details. I mean, by now, I think everybody in America has probably seen Pretty Woman, but if by some chance you still haven't seen it, make time for it. Take a couple of hours and watch this movie. And if you haven't seen it in years, go back to it. I think you'll enjoy it a lot. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things we are doing?
Listeners can follow me on Blue Sky at peterwolfrank.bsky.social.
They can follow me on Blue Sky at joeblevins.bsky.social. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week is the film adaptation of Terrence McNally's classic play, Frankie and Johnny and the Clair de Lune. It is Frankie and Johnny, starring Al Pacino and Michelle Pfeiffer.
I have no recollection of this film at all, so I will be looking forward to revisiting it or visiting it for the first time. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Chick a beauty. I love her hair, I love her clothes, I love her teeth, I get a lot of that pose. Ooh, looky there, ain't she pretty?
Well, I'm not trying to land him, I'm just using him for sex.